one of the examples that I used was that if you kids, and by no means do not do this, don't do this. Look at me. Don't do this. But if you were to try and play hide and seek from Ross, you will lose. Because Ross knows everything. Right? He knows every nook and cranny of this place. And likewise, somebody pointed out, and I thought it was really insightful, but likewise, if Ross tried to hide from us, none of us are going to find him. Because he's going to go places that we couldn't go, and he's going to go places that we wouldn't go. Like, I imagine him going full Quasimodo, up there someplace with a pet rat, talking to him and stuff. I don't know, maybe. I just imagine you hiding somewhere where we can't find you. And I use that as an example because you have to remember that as we approach the story of Noah and the ark, because I use that as an example because if God chooses to remain hidden, or God totally abandons his people, that's it. There's no hope. There's no way of coming back from that. It's all over. It would be even more pointless and futile than trying to find Ross. But here's the beautiful thing. It is our nature, it is our tendency to run from God. It's our nature, it's our tendency to ignore him, to neglect him, to rebel against him, to hide. But it is God's nature to seek. You always see him coming after those he loves. And he always delivers mercy in the judgment. We saw that with Adam and Eve. God told them that if they ate the fruit, they would die. And so all that was required of God's law at that point was 2 dead bodies. And we're going to see it again in Noah. Because God told Noah? That's Moana and Noah together, just so you know. God told Noah that mankind had become corrupt and evil, and that he was going to destroy the world and every living thing in a flood. And to be clear, that included Noah. And we'll see that. And then God pursued Noah and his family and offered mercy and escape. He came to seek and save the lost. He came to seek and save the judged. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Because you know the story. You know that God is going to destroy every living thing. And so the first question, if you don't really look at it, the first question is, okay, so surely all of the people must be crazed murderers. You know, when we talked about it as a family, Joy Lynn, immediate question, which Noah brings up very difficult questions. I do not know how we got from this story to putting smiling giraffes on nursery walls. I really don't. Because it's a very difficult, hard story. But, Joy Lynn's question was what? Are there knife-wielding babies? Surely everyone must be crazed. Everyone must be sinning. Everyone must be Patriots fans. Everyone must be something, right? I mean, there has to be some common denominator that makes all these people worthy of being destroyed. And if you start chapter 6, it says this. And I'm only going to talk about this because it's a curiosity among some people. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Now there's lots of different explanations. The simplest explanation that I can give is that there were 2 lines. There was one from Abel, and one from Seth, and one from Cain. And so you had the daughters of men from the line of Cain, and the sons of God from Abel and Seth. And those 2 lines intermarried in a way that diluted the God followers. It's very similar to what happens later on in the Old Testament when the kings and when the people, they intermarry between the Jewish people and the pagan people, and it dilutes the God followers. And then also you've got to note that the verses say they chose whomever they wanted. And so there's the possible indication of ignoring God's input. Let's keep reading. I said I only pause there briefly because people wonder about that sons of God and daughters of men thing. But here's verse 3. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. That 120 years, we believe, is the time that Noah took to build the ark and to warn his fellow man of God's coming judgment. Part of that evidence is there in 2 Peter, where it says God did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. But here's the key verse when it comes to man's condition. Why would God destroy everything? And it's in verse 5. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. What a massive statement. The Bible does this often. I call it stacking words. It's what you kids do when you're really excited about something. Right? Something has happened and you're really excited about it and you're telling somebody about it and you stack words. It was awesome. It was incredible. It was insane. It was ridiculous. Oh man! You just keep adding words, right? And finally somebody goes, okay, we get it. But that's what the Bible does often, is it just stacks those words. It doesn't just say that people were wicked. It says their wickedness was great. So how great? So great that every, not some, every action, no, every intention, every thought in man's heart. So those evil intentions were sometimes evil? No. Only evil. Part of the time? No, continually. All of the time. I mean, do you see how it just stacks on top of each other? Wickedness, that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now that should give us pause for just a second here. It's not the actions that God is judging. I mean, do you see that? Verse 5, there's nothing in there about everyone being a crazed murderer. There's nothing in there about everyone being criminal. It says the thoughts and intentions of man's heart were evil all the time. It's not just the bad things that I do that are righteously judged by God. It's the bad reasons that I do even good things. That is tough to take. Wrong motive is enough to separate me from God. That's the reason that we need Jesus' righteousness given to us, credited to us, put into our account, because he is the only one whose righteousness was great and whose intent of his heart and the thoughts of his heart was only holy all the time. That's why we need him. So then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The flood reminds us that God is under zero obligation to rescue anyone. Again, this is so hard. How we got the happy giraffes on nursery walls, I don't know. He has the right, he has every right to hide, to be unreachable, to judge without mercy. One writer said that the purpose of the flood, God's purpose in the flood, was to provide an appropriate historical demonstration of the ultimate destiny of a world under sin. In other words, the flood is a demonstration of the end, the result of sin. So the prophet would say, there is none righteous, no, not one. Paul would later say the wages of sin is death. The flood is a demonstration of God's righteous judgment on man's sin, on man's heart. And we'll talk about the righteousness of that in just a minute. But we have to sit there for a minute. If we don't sit very uncomfortably, if we don't sit convicted, if we're not pressed on by this idea, then we miss the point of knowing. If we aren't pressed on by the reality of God's judgment, we're going to miss what Noah's really about. God is going to destroy every living thing. But it's not because this Old Testament God flies off the handle in rage and starts smiting people. It's because His righteousness, His holiness, demands a response to the sin problem that is killing the people He loves. So look at God's side of this. Look more deeply at God's side of this. Look at verse 6:6, and let these words sink in. The Lord was sorry that He had made man on the earth, and He was grieved in His heart. And the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created, from the face of the land. From man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky. That's all of creation. That's meant to echo the creation story. For I am sorry that I have made them. Doesn't God being sorry? Very unusual words to be used of God. Some translations actually translate this, God repented. What are we supposed to do with that? Now, I want to make it clear, this does not mean God made a mistake. This is not, I'm sorry, in the sense of, I wish I hadn't done that. This is not when one of you boys, or girls for that matter, does something really daring and dangerous and breaks your arm and thinks, oh, man, I wish I hadn't done that.
Really?
And then simultaneously thinks, but it was so cool! Right? This is not Jared Watkins in My Old Neighborhood. Kids, you don't know what Evel Knievel is. Adults, some of you do, if you're old. But Jared Watkins in My Neighborhood decided to jump his bike over the creek. It didn't end well, just saying. It was really cool. And he's thought to himself later, I wish I hadn't done that. This is not that, okay? God doesn't make mistakes. And these words are actually even more tragic than that. Applied to God, they're even more unusual than you think. Here's what the word means in Hebrew. Here's how it's used elsewhere in Scripture. The word refers to the emotion an abandoned wife feels when her husband leaves her. That's the emotion being applied to God. It can be translated unfulfilled longing or despairing frustration. So God's heart is broken by those who hide from Him. Yet He still seeks those who break His heart. If you want to know God's position toward man, it is broken-hearted desire. See, there's a question that is raised over and over again throughout Scripture. How does God righteously bring justice and judgment and rescue the people that He loves so much? How does He do both of those things? Because, just catch this. If God lets sin go, He's not just. He's not righteous. He's not holy. He is no God. But if God punishes sin, there's no hope. See, God can't work the way that we work. And here's how we work. Stop me when I'm wrong. If you wrong me, if you hurt me, then I can respond a whole lot of different ways. If you wrong me, typically, in my flesh, in my normal self, and let's say it's, you didn't cut me off in traffic, you hurt me, you wounded me deeply. then I begin to think of you as evil. You're wrong. I shut you down. I close you out. I cut you off. I want you to pay for what you did to me. I want you to suffer like I'm suffering because of what you did to me. I might have taken that too far, but stop me when I'm wrong. But, put shoe on the other foot. If I wrong you, I'm so sorry. You just got to understand, that's not who I am. I didn't mean that. You got to forgive me, man. I mean, I just kind of lost my mind there for a minute. That's not me. So the short version of that is justice for them, mercy for me. Justice for everybody else. Justice for all those sinners out there somewhere doing those awful, horrible things. But mercy for me because I'm not so bad. God can't work that way. There's no way to draw a line there. I mean, if that's the way that God would work, then... So everybody that doesn't kill anybody is okay, but what about people who rob from other people? What about people who just break another person's heart? What about people who wound somebody so deeply that they just aren't the same for the rest of their lives? You didn't actually kill them, but the damage. So God can't work that way. God's righteousness, His holiness, demands justice and judgment of anyone and anything that would harm His beloved creation. But His love demands that He spares His people and rescues them. So here's the truth. You are deeply loved by God, more so than you could possibly imagine. You're also under God's judgment. So how can God do both? And the answer is in chapter 6, verse 8. I cannot stand there because this is just going to keep getting shorter. Chapter 6, verse 8. How can God do both of those things? But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Literally it says Noah was graced by God. And skip to verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and behold, I am about to destroy all flesh with the earth. I think we read that and we see them when we think of those people. But when God says all flesh is corrupt, Noah is included. Noah, at that moment, is under the judgment of God, along with all of humanity. If God stops speaking, Noah is doomed with the rest of humanity. If God had hidden Himself, Noah is doomed with the rest of humanity. Our tendency is to hide, God's tendency is to seek, and so God keeps speaking. Look at it, verse 13, one more time. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of people, and behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Verse 14, make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms, and shall cover it inside and out with pitch, and this is how you shall make it. And then God gave specific instructions for Noah to follow. Why? Because Noah was graced by God. Because Noah was chosen by God. This is so critical because otherwise we're going to read this and we're going to think that Noah had something in him, and God looked out on all the people and said, you know what? You're not as bad as everybody else, so I'm going to choose you. We think that he had some kind of righteousness or some kind of behavior that qualified him to get in the ark. Something in him that deserved God's grace. But these verses remind us that long before God planned judgment, God planned redemption. That's why, and I've said this before, but there's several verses, especially in the New Testament, that talks about Christ being raised from the foundation of the earth. Noah is not the one guy who had it all together, so God said, I'll use you. Noah is included in verse 5. He is not the exception to that rule. So why does God rescue Noah? Because God seeks to rescue. Hebrews 11 further explains, it says, by faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Noah was righteous because he responded to God's gracious offer to rescue. Because he was warned by God about things not yet seen. See, you and I have not seen the judgment of God. But he's warned us about it. Jesus stood on this planet and said, I didn't come here to, oh boy. I started it, now I got to finish it, and I can't remember it. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he does not believe in the name of God's one and only Son. Jesus himself stood on planet Earth and said those words. Noah's righteousness came from faith. It is a gift righteousness. And in reverence, Noah responded to that warning in obedience and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. That's what Hebrews says. God did not save Noah because he was righteous. Noah became righteous because he received God's offer of salvation. I've heard it explained this way, and I love this. It's like you wake up in an ambulance. I don't love that idea, but it's a really good illustration, I think. It's like you wake up in an ambulance, and there's monitors hooked up to you, and there's two guys that are trying to do all kinds of different things to you, and one of them in a very calm voice says, you were in an awful accident, and it's okay, we got you, we rescued you, we're going to put you, you're on the gurney, we've got this going into your, this IV going into you, and we're giving you these drugs, and we're going to take you to the hospital, and we're going to take care of you. You don't do anything other than say, okay. Because you could get up and start pulling out tubes and say, no, I'm fine. But if you do that, you short-circuit the rescue. Does that make sense? It's like you wake up in an ambulance, because you're waking up in an ambulance, you're waking up on planet Earth separated from God. And Jesus is here saying, okay, here's the thing. I've done everything for your rescue. All you got to do is accept it. Now you can pull out wires and you can resist all you want to, but that'll just short-circuit the rescue that I've already bought for you. We are not bad people or even good people trying to get better. This is Charles Spurgeon. We are rebels against God, whose only salvation is to lay down our arms and surrender. So look at it again, in case you're just not convinced yet. Chapter 6, verse 22. It says, thus Noah did, according to all that God had commanded him, so he did. Chapter 7. Just skip that little break in there. But chapter 7. Then the Lord said to Noah, enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me at this time. His righteousness followed his grace. He did not earn God's grace. So in one moment, in one motion, God brought judgment and salvation. He brought a flood of wrath and judgment and a way out. Salvation to those who didn't deserve it. Now you know the rest of the story. The water came up, 40 days and 40 nights, all that stuff. All flesh that moved on the earth perished. And then in chapter 8, the water begins to recede, and the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. Chapter 8, verse 5, God says, Noah, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Verse 21, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man. Isn't that good news? Most of you don't have your Bibles open, you don't have your little notes open. So just listen to me for just a second. And the Lord said to us, okay, the flood's over. We've wiped out all of humanity. We chose, by grace, Noah. We put him on the ark. He built the ark. He went into the ark in obedience. 40 days, 40 nights. Then the flood's waters receded. Hundreds of days of just kind of hanging out, waiting for things to get back to normal. And the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man. Man, thank goodness for that. But then, listen to this. Oh my gosh, listen to this. I will never again curse the ground on account of man. For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. And I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. He doesn't say, because I know man is going to do better this time around. He doesn't say, because surely he learned his lesson. He doesn't say, I won't drown the earth again because Noah is going to get it right. And if you've read the rest of the story, you know Noah doesn't get it right. God says, I know man is evil, but I won't drown the world again. In other words, I'm going to reveal a different solution. Chapter 8, verse 12. God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of covenant between me and the earth. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow will be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. That, by the way, is why I believe that this was a worldwide flood. I can't prove how all the animals got into the ark. I can't figure out how they handled all the poop. I can't figure out any of that stuff. I don't even know where all the water went, because there's not enough water on the planet to do what happened here. I can't explain any of that. But God promised to never flood the world again. And if it was a local flood, like some people believe, then He has broken His promise thousands of times. So I choose to base my understanding of this and my trust in this based on God's character, not on some historical whatever. Just a little side. And I also want to remind you that when it says that I will remember my covenant, forget remember or covenant words in the Old Testament. It's not as though God goes, oh, there's a rainbow, I can't kill him. It's not like, oh, I remember. It's not that. Just trust me on that, okay? Covenant, forget and remember, is to treat according to the covenant. So, I will treat you according to my covenant. Verse 16, when the bow is in the cloud, I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Again, Charles Spurgeon, see, I thought this was like a new thing. I thought this was a new interpretation. If you've read the Jesus Storybook Bible, it talks about how that word for bow actually means a battle bow. I thought that was some sort of new interpretation. As far as I can tell, it was Charles Spurgeon back in the 1800s that figured that one out. And maybe before him. So it's not just, oh, here's how the rainbow came to be. It's not that kind of fable. It's that God put His war bow up. He ceased. God will not accomplish His salvation. That's the other thing that he points out, Spurgeon points out, is that the bow points up. God will not accomplish His salvation by shooting His arrows of His wrath into men. God will wipe evil from the earth by firing the arrows of wrath into Himself. The arrow, the bow, pointed up into God's heart, if you will, is a preview of Jesus. Jesus will obey God just as Noah did, even though no one understands what he's doing. Jesus will provide an ark of salvation to those who, like Noah, by faith, see God's righteous judgment and obey by trusting He has provided the way of rescue. He lifts us above the waters of judgment because He was submerged into the waters of judgment. God poured out the flood of His judgment on Jesus so that you and I don't even have spray on us. Jesus was covered by the earth as the waters covered the earth. Only instead of a natural but gracious receding of the water over months, Jesus burst from the tomb gloriously free, gloriously victorious. See, that's the picture of the rainbow. So, let's wrap this up. And I want to answer the questions that I have offered to you as a way to get to the gospel. And these are just some of the right answers. You know, when my family sat at the dinner table and frankly argued about it for about a half hour, 45 minutes, yeah, it happens. It's okay. If when you ask these questions of your kids, if you actually do this family-centered or gospel-centered family discipleship in your homes, in your cars, you're going to get some weird times, okay? Just it's going to happen. But these are some of the answers, not necessarily the right answers. But who is God? Apart from Jesus, He is the righteous judge. He is holy. He is all light. He is unapproachable. But because of Jesus, He is both judge and the one who pardons. He demands the ransom, and then He makes the payment. He is the bringer of justice and rescue. He is all holiness and righteousness, and He is all love and all mercy. What has He done, especially as this scene in Jesus? Because that's how you get to that, who is He? What has He done, especially as it is fulfilled in Christ? What has He done? It's exactly what He did in Jesus. He fired the bow upward, pouring out all of His wrath on Him. So who are we? Apart from Him, we're judged. We're the children of wrath. We're the condemned. Those are biblical words. I'm not making those up. Those are quotes. But because of Jesus, we are God's children. We are forgiven. We are cleansed. And so we get to that final question of what do we do? Too often messages about Noah, especially to kids, end with, so go be like Noah. Okay? If there's one way that we actually can be like Noah, it's this. Let the grace that God has given you transform you. See, God graced Noah by saying, build a boat. Noah was obedient and built a boat to rescue himself. And God says, I saw you as righteous. Let the grace that God gave you change you. What do? We do what one writer calls we dress in robes of wonder. I like that. We look full on into, as if we're looking into the sun. We look into God's holiness and His righteousness. We recognize that according to the psalmist, that He dwells in unapproachable light. And then we smile and realize that He dwells in unapproachable light, and so He came to us. He came seeking us. So we live to honor that. If He asks us to build a boat or do something foolish, we do it. Not because we understand what we're doing, but because we trust Him. We ride out every difficulty and trial, knowing that it is far less than what we've already been rescued from. And knowing that every trial, everything that comes to us is designed by our loving Father to give Himself, to give good to us and glory to Him. We know that the promise of what is to come far outweighs what we're dealing with. What do? We enjoy it. We love it. Next time you see a rainbow in the sky, I hope you don't think of Noah and the ark. I hope you remember that that bow means that the enmity between God and man is abolished because the injury went to Christ, not to us. So we get to love that and live in that. In short, you've heard me say it many, many times, we get to live in amazing. So God, I just pray and ask that we would do that.